ringside, by golly, we're about ready to go with more big action.
Thank you very much, and welcome to Georgia Championship Wrestling. I'm Gordon Sewell, your host, and we have quite an hour in store for us.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Championship Wrestling. At ringside, this is Vince McMahon, along with wrestling's only living legend, Bruno Sammartino.
Welcome to this week's edition of Mid-South Wrestling Television. I'm your host, Boyd Pierce, another outstanding card.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Regional Rasslin podcast, where we talk the territories. I am Ray Russell, and this week we continue on our story, or actually we begin our journey of the AWA Championship Wrestling program on ESPN. The last time out here in the AWA project, we set the stage with guest Roman Gomez, and he's going to be back in just a moment. As we kick things off here this week, we had a lot of great feedback. I want to thank everybody out there for it. We continue to hope to entertain and inform you on an era of the AWA that's not really discussed too often. A lot of people think that Hulk Hogan left and then it went straight to the crapper, and that's simply not the case. Verne Gagne is struggling, but still bringing in a lot of talent. We talked about Sergeant Slaughter, the Road Warriors, Jimmy Garvin, the Freebirds, the list goes on. And we're going to talk about some of that talent again here this week. And in order to do that, we're going to bring back onto the program right now. Welcome back once again from the fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada, the one and only Mr. Roman Gomez.
Wow. I should hire you to be my PR guy, man. You sound amazing.
I can do that.
Great to be back, Ray.
The old Alberto Del Rio, the ring announcer, the Ricardo Rodriguez. Roman Gomez, welcome back to the program, man. We are kicking now, man. We set the stage last time out here for the AWA Championship Wrestling on ESPN, and now we're going to pick up where we left off, which is this week we're actually going to be discussing some of the TV.
Yeah, it was a fun episode, the last one we did, and I'm looking forward to this, breaking down the TV action and maybe some behind-the-scenes stories and whatnot, and see where it takes us.
First of all, with a new project, anytime you like to get a little good feedback. Roman, you were talking to me off air. You said you heard from a few people that thought it was a really fun episode, but I too heard from several people, including WrestleCopia's own Dan Gennity. And before everybody goes, well, he's part of WrestleCopia, Ray, Dan doesn't necessarily text me a whole lot about if a show was good or bad. Me and Dan talk a lot about Japan, go figures. So we don't really talk about the other podcasts and things, but Dan even reached out, and I know he's a friend of yours as well, Roman, and he said, wow, that was a really fun. I really enjoyed that episode setting the stage on the AWA on ESPN.
Yeah, it's good when you hear from people, and if anybody wants to reach out, I don't have an ego, so if there's something you think I need improvement on or you didn't like, whatever, hit me up. I'll listen, but we always appreciate when people listen and enjoy it, because that's what makes it fun.
Yeah, and I explained just really briefly there as we got going here this week that basically last week we talked a little bit, obviously, about Hulk Hogan and what went wrong there with Verne Gagne. I don't want to say not being able to adapt, but refusing to adapt or evolve, I should say, with the Hulkamania era there of the AWA. So Hulkster goes away. He takes some of his buddies with him along the way. And a lot of people, the narrative we know out there was pretty much whenever you hear about the AWA, it was obviously the good old days, the golden era, pre-Hogan, but then you have the Hulk Hogan era of the early 1980s, and then pretty much everybody jumps to the end, the demise, the death of AWA. You don't hear about what happened in between, and we know we're going to get there at some point, and I hope we cover at least some of that, because even it's so bad that it's good at certain points, and there's always something good to get out of that. But at the same time, we're here to tell the tale right now of the talent that was here in 1985.
Lots of talent, lots of people that would go on to the WWF, or maybe that they were previously in the WWF. There was lots of talent going on in 1985.
Well, we're going to try to stretch this particular episode out for an entire episode of Regional Rasslin, because there's so much extra stuff we're going to be discussing here that we won't need to in future episodes, but we're going to be talking about some of the referees, the announcers, all sorts of things going on here. And right out of the gate, I do want to make mention, and we talked about it a little bit last time we were here, Roman, but a lot of people believed that the original air date for the first AWA on the ESPN, the Championship Wrestling program, was September 3rd, and that's because in the tape trading world, it's been accepted because it's pretty much the first episode anybody could find, so naturally that's got to be the first episode. And as I skimmed through the opening, Verne wasn't really selling it like the first episode, and I just thought, even for Verne, even for curmudgeon Verne, it feels like you would at least mention the fact that this is our first episode on your station, and he doesn't do that. And I did some digging and kind of figured out there was an episode prior, and I have to thank Dave Meltzer for that, because he mentioned in the Observer that the first episode was, in fact, August 27th. And I talked already about how I did the digging to figure out the matches, and come to find out, thanks to Roman, he discovered that on the old subscription, the WWE 24/7, once upon a time, they aired this first episode under the wrong air date. Go figure. Of June 27th. This is, in fact, August 27th we're going to be covering. And I'm so happy you were able to kind of dig that out, because when you said you had it, I thought maybe it was just bits and pieces. But when you sent it to me, Hard Media guys, talk about DVD, sent it to me to the mail. I said, oh my gosh, it's the full episode, and it's in, pristine quality.
I'm a stickler for dates. I do lots of compilations and stuff, and I like to be accurate, and Ray is very accurate. He helped me out going through all his hours of research and digging through 100 billion observers and whatnot to come up with the accurate date. But yeah, a lot of times it is hard to get accuracy, especially something that the WWE puts out. They're very inaccurate on a lot of their dates.
Right. They're not really doing the digging to confirm. They see a date, they write it down. Maybe somebody wrote 8/27 and it looked like 6/27, and that's what they rolled with. Whatever the reason, I'm glad we were able to figure it out and get it, here. And unfortunately, I like to figure out the taping date, the schedule of which, when this took place before it aired. Unfortunately, I couldn't nail it down. And I do want to thank Jamie Ward, who shared this story with us in recent weeks, I believe on the Patreon side of the world. But Jamie talked about attending this event, but not attending this event, because Jamie had gotten some tickets through his father's work, or I can't remember the story, but supposedly the tickets would be at will call. They'd say the name, and they would get the tickets, and the guy's name, there were no tickets to be had once they drove from Philly to Atlantic City. And so I believe, if I remember correctly, Jamie said his dad tried to purchase tickets, but they were sold out at that point. So unfortunately, they had to turn around and go back home. But Jamie got to meet Nick Bockwinkel in the elevator at the end of the day, at the very least. So he had that going for him.
Well, that's pretty cool. I got the privilege of getting to know Nick Bockwinkel when I was an announcer for an independent league here in town many moons ago. Mm-hmm. And he helped train some of the guys. And Nick Bockwinkel was a great guy, and he was not afraid to tell stories. You could ask him one question, and he'll talk to you for an hour and a half. And so that was a good experience for Jamie. I'm sure it was.
Yeah. Jamie seems to luck out with the guys that he meets, because they have great conversations with him. They're not off-putting and things. And so I would have loved to have met Nick. I don't know that I ever was in a same room with Nick. I certainly didn't have any conversations with Nick. I got to talk with some of the other legends throughout the last 30 years, but Nick was not one of them, unfortunately. But he seemed like a very cool dude. And I know Bobby Heenan used to always say, you ask Nick for the time, and he tells you how to build the watch. And that's kind of how, and I kind of went through that with Bob Roop as well. Me and Bob joke about that. So him and Nick were two peas out of the same pod in regards to loving to tell stories. So I kind of got to talk to Nick through Bob, at least the style of Nick Bockwinkel anyway.
And to get on Jamie's story for a second,
yeah.
And I can vouch, just coming from Vegas and, being in Vegas a lot of times, since this one was taped at the Atlantic City, the Tropicana in Atlantic City, unfortunately for him not getting tickets, it's probably because they gave some away. The casinos are notorious for giving away, and it sucks because somebody like Jamie, who was willing to pay for it, got shut out because of that, because they give them to the high rollers or try to lure people into the casino, because they figure if you go to the wrestling matches, you're going to gamble afterwards or even before the matches start.
Even the old timeshare pitches as well. We've had that attempted upon us when we're in Vegas. Hey, you want to sit down and listen to us pitch a timeshare to you for an hour, and then you can go to this band to go see this play or whatever the case may be. So I can see that there, and specifically the AWA. I don't think anybody was sitting down for an hour to get a ticket, but I do believe you're right that, hey, come on into the Tropicana. We've got some free tickets here for this wrestling thing we got going on right now. And it's unfortunate for you, Jamie. We're very sorry to hear that, but Jamie couldn't pinpoint the date. He wanted to say that he thought that it took place in early August. Very latest would have been late July, he says. That's his feeling. And I only question that because the AWA, a lot of times, they would tape 2 and 3 months of stuff in advance before they aired it. Now, maybe this was a little closer simply because it was a new thing they were doing here on ESPN. I have no idea what the actual date was. We know It was the summer of 1985, and here we are, August 27th, the debut edition of Championship Wrestling on ESPN. Taped, again, summer of 85. Matches recorded, as you said, Roman, at the Tropicana Hotel and Casino in Atlantic City, New Jersey. So the AWA, by this point, Verne, was notorious for hitting up the casinos for a place to show events. I suppose, I guess it was a cheap, easy in.
Yeah, and it probably, as far as Verne was concerned, probably made it feel like it had a major league feel to it, instead of the little television studio that they used to do in the late 70s or 80s, like, oh, we're at the entertainment capital of the world, a casino there, or, a casino in Atlantic City, like it has a little more prestigious sound to it than, we're at the television studio that holds 55 people.
Well, it sure beats 1989 when the WWE showed that the AWA where they had the green screen with the fake fans on each side. There was no fan. It was when I saw that, and my son just saw that for the first time maybe last year, and his jaw, like I told him what to expect, and even still, his jaw dropped, and he was like, "What the hell is this?" I said, "Yeah, it's hard times, baby, very hard times, if you will." Oh, man, but this was a lot better times for Verne. We're going to go back. We talked about how they got the deal. It was basically ESPN needed content, Verne needed a home, and ESPN is where we go to get some national exposure, even though ESPN was still in its infancy. Hosted by the one and only Larry Nelson. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of Larry stories come out over the weeks and months to come here. And Larry's going to be joined by, and I love this, expert commentator, not just a commentator, expert commentator, Verne Gagne, right out of the gate. Here we go, Roman.
Yeah, who's going to get his promotion over better than the head honcho himself? Verne, kind of like Bill Watt in the UWF.
Nobody's going to get Bill's promotion over better than Bill, but nobody gets Verne over better than Verne. I don't know about his promotion.
Yeah, you're onto something, but he had an idea, what direction he wanted to go, sort of, to a certain extent. Yeah.
I think the direction was backwards, Roman, to the 1970s, but well, I don't want to shit on Verne too much because there's a lot of Verne lovers and AWA lovers out there, and I'm trying to have some fun here, guys. That's what we do. As we tell the story, we inform, but we try to entertain as well. And yes, there was plenty of great AWA stuff. I'm not a hater, but I am going to have some fun with it. So deal with it, people. Because how do you get over the future of pro wrestling and the current stars of the AWA? You talk to Verne Gagne at the opening of the show about Verne Gagne. That's right. Verne going to open the show to tell you about his background in pro wrestling. Says he was in the ring for over 30 years, a pro wrestler. Verne started wrestling in high school at the age of 15, played amateur football, high school, more football and wrestling in the University of Minnesota, Big Ten champion 4 times in wrestling, and at the 1948 Olympics in London as well. Verne Gagne was definitely an amateur's amateur, one of the best ever to do it. As Larry Nelson says, wow, Verne, 30 years a pro wrestler, but Verne argues, no, Larry, 35, because I came out of retirement earlier this year. Before I broke some ribs, and back to retirement, he plans to stay. So what did you make of this Verne Gagne right out of the window? Let's tell you a little story about the guy you're looking at, Verne Gagne.
Yeah, it's like don't dislocate your shoulder patting yourself on the back. He had plenty of credentials, no doubt, but I don't need to hear how he beat Abraham Lincoln 2 out of 3 falls. Let's get to the action. It
kind of felt like, and now you know the rest of the story, right? So that's kind of what it felt like, Verne Gagne.
Right.
It was abbreviated. I'll give him that much. But yeah, right out of the gate, like, why am I watching? I mean, if I'm just casual guy, maybe not even a normal wrestling fan, flipping the channel, why am I leaving it here to listen to this old bald guy tell me about his credentials from 30 years ago? I'm not saying there's not a place for it, but is that what you want to do at the top of your very first program?
Yeah, that's not how I would do it, and it's one of those things where if it was hypothetically like a cage match, if he was drawing from his experience in that, I remember my first cage match, that's one thing, but just to kind of let the whole world know how great of a wrestler you were, like, okay, that's great, but you're not wrestling on tonight's card. You're not wrestling on next week's card, like, let's stick with what's going on at the here and now.
Well, we can double down and confirm, however, that this is indeed the debut edition because Verne confirms it right here as he name drops ESPN during the intro where they're happy to be here being a part of ESPN, their new promotion or their new program, Championship Wrestling. They already have All-Star Wrestling, which is a syndicated program. Now we have Championship Wrestling on ESPN, and we go to ringside commentators, Doug McLeod, and of course, expert commentary by Verne Gagne. Doug going to do the play-by-play. Now, there's one guy, McLeod, that Vince didn't even try to grab. He grabbed Ron Trotgard, he grabbed Roger Kent, but not McLeod. And so I had to do a little digging. Why not McLeod? Well, McLeod was going to be a Minnesota boy, for better or worse, broadcaster of high school, college, and professional hockey in the Minnesota area. Even later did the commentary on Fox Sports. Up until a controversial moment in 2019 at KSTC Channel 45, who pulled Doug McLeod as the announcer mid-game after he made a comment about lynching ropes during a Minnesota boys state hockey tournament. Later on, McLeod apologized and chalked it up to bad humor, but not bad intent. Now, sadly, McLeod passed away in 2023, so we can't interview him or talk to him about these memories. But let me ask you, do you have any memories of Doug McLeod as a commentator?
I actually didn't mind him. I mean, he's not Gordon Soley or anything, but I didn't mind when he was on the mic. I thought he did okay in the interviews, and, I didn't have a problem with him on commentary, to tell you the truth.
I remember I've watched tapes, I've traded tapes, I've heard Doug McLeod comment. This is when first time I've actually had to sit down and listen and focus, and I thought he did an okay job. I've seen some people do some reviews of these shows in the past online. They're not really a big fan, and like you said, he's not Gordon Soley, he's definitely not Jim Ross, but he seems to have a grasp of what Verne wants from him out here.
Yeah, and he had a decent speaking voice, too, which definitely helps. At least for me it does. Right. I don't want to hear somebody that sounds like Roseanne Barr on commentary, or anything. He sounded okay, and, I never had a problem. He didn't make me change the channel, put it that way.
I gotcha. Well, we got a upscale ring announcer here. He's worked for the WWF and later the WWF. Of course, they've continued to start moving around now at TV tapings and whatnot, but he's here in the AWA in 1985, at least for the Atlantic City tapings. I'm talking about the one and only, the world's most dangerous announcer, ring announcer, I think Jim Ross would refer to him, Gary Michael Capetta. So that's always cool. I love Gary. Yeah,
he made it seem a little more professional, too, because you had seen him in the WWE or WWF at that time. People had known him. It had kind of a little more prestigious feel with him doing the intros.
Well, we go to the ring finally for our opening match. It's going to be the return, and we'll talk about that in a moment, of gorgeous Jimmy Garvin, along with Precious in his corner, of course, Smooch, as he refers to her in real life, battling Larry Winters. But I noticed there was no introduction here, and that's because on the WWE version, they're not going to play Sharp Dressed Man. They simply go straight to the ring, and Garvin's entrance is out of the way. But we will see Jimmy intro on the next episode, so I'm looking forward to the next time we meet Roman. But until then, it is Jimmy Garvin back in the territory, and the referee here is a guy by the name of, real name, Tom Fornini, who also unfortunately passed away back in 24. Tom was the nephew of Angelo Savoldi and cousin to Mario and Jumpin' Joe Savoldi, so you may also know him as Tom Savoldi. Tommy first got started in the mid-'70s working for the WWF and other Northeastern places. Savoldi was one of the few referees at that time to hold referees' licenses in both New York and New Jersey back in the Athletic Commission days. And so knowing the wrestling business, being part of the business with his family, he was even more in demand, obviously from the WWF or here in the AWA, because not only do we have to have an Athletic Commission referee somewhere on the show, but this guy's in on it. He gets it.
Yeah, I had no idea he was related to the Savoldis. So once again, you taught me something I did not know.
Yes. So, but Tommy, he would get around up there from the WWF here in the AWA. Obviously, that means he also worked Pro Wrestling USA. When Crockett would come through, they would bring him in. I think I even saw him for Herb Abrams later on in the UWF. So Tommy hung around up there for quite a bit. Yeah, Savoldi, Fornini, call him what you will, but he is he's the referee here for our opening bout. And Larry Winters, a Philly boy. Back to the Northeast once again, Philadelphia. Larry Winters, saw his name a lot in the aftermags growing up. Worked a lot for Pennsylvania and here in Ohio. I know he worked with Zoltan and crew at the Tri-States, or Tri-Cities, whatever it was there in the early 1980s. And Larry's going to spend a little time here, especially when they're working the Tropicana. And he'll wind up basically living and staying in the Northeast, though, working for the Savoldis, Joel Goodhart, the Tri-States, eventually even working the early ECW, the Eastern Championship Wrestling.
Yeah, that's how I remember the name, him being an East Coast guy. And I I immediately thought of ECW when I heard Winters.
So, yeah, unfortunately, he's also gone. We lost him back in 2015 in his late 50s, so he died young. But going back and talking about Larry Winters, early on, I got to see his name a lot from the Apter magazines. He was one of those Philly boys, like I said, Johnny Hotbody, Tony Stetson, Larry Winters, King Kahlua, all those names. And we'll talk about Kahlua here in a little bit as well. But Larry Winters here, as Jimmy Garvin is just arriving. He had been, quote-unquote, suspended for the summer, goes away from the AWA back in May. I don't remember the storyline. Was there a storyline in place? Do you remember, Roman? Do you recall? Or was he simply just suspended off air?
It's so funny you asked that because I was wondering about that too. I thought they did. I know Precious used her spray can like in Baron von Raschke's eyes, and I thought it was something along those lines that she kept interfering. So if he got suspended, maybe she couldn't interfere. I could be wrong on that, but I thought it had something to do with Precious and the spray can. But that was a long time ago, so don't quote me on that.
Yes, the infamous spray can, which is not here for some reason. So Jimmy Garvin suspended, and as Roman said, it may have been Precious. So, of course, it is not Jimmy's fault, as he would like us to know. But he's making his return here this week, just in time for the ESPN. And he'll come back full-time by September. Well, Jimmy Garvin, actually, this entire time he's been suspended. He's been working some really great matches up in Montreal. Of course, the Garvins, the Road Warriors we know were up there, the Rougeaus. There's a lot of those matches are out there in full length. I mean, really, really great main event style matches. And Jimmy's on his way back, but he's here for ESPN, strutting around, showing off that beautiful hair before he takes to the mat. Verne Gagne mentioning both men's amateur backgrounds. Both guys competed at high school level, and so they've got a background here in wrestling. As Garvin got to work an armbar early on, Winters winds up escaping with a good old amateur stomp to the face. And he's the good guy, Roman. Here we got Larry Winters, but it was effective.
Yes, it was.
So Jimmy, with a shot to the gut, regains control quickly. More posing in between the wrestling from Gorgeous One. Verne comparing Garvin to Gorgeous George. I wrote, I guess, because that's how you're going to get a guy over, Roman, in 1985. Reference somebody from 1955.
Yeah, and if you were watching this in 85, there was no Google, so if you're new to the AWA, you might be like, who's Gorgeous George? I don't know anything about him, so
of a certain
Verne
age,
was trying.
Yeah, Verne was trying to compare and contrast and whatever the situation was there. They're both start with gorgeous. I think that's what he was going for as well, on top of the showmanship, the showboat of both guys. But yeah, I mean, I'd heard of Gorgeous George from my dad and from my grandfather, so I kind of had an idea, at least, of what this would have meant here. But there's a lot of people of certain ages that may not even know what the hell Verne's referencing. So yeah, I wrote, way to be Verne, but that's okay. Brainbuster getting an easy victory this week for Jimmy Garvin, who is back, scores the win in just 4 minutes and 9 seconds.
Yeah, and the Brainbuster was a move I always liked. Him and Dick Murdoch used to do that a lot, and very dangerous, too, if it's not done right. I mean, you really could damage somebody's neck or drop them on their head the wrong way. But, yeah, Garvin returned. It was always good to see him, and he was such a trendsetter because, I mean, how many guys now go to the ring with a girl? It's right. He was one of the few that did it back then, before Savage and Elizabeth did it,
Well, you hear tell of a handful of valets, but they weren't really heel manager type valets. These early ladies of the 80s specifically, they really honed the craft of what would become Sensational Sherry and women like that. Because like you said, you can go back and look up Slave Girl Moolah or Bunny Love with Paul Christie, but these ladies were just kind of there. They might have interacted to some degree, but they weren't all in like Sunshine, like Precious, like Sherry will be. And so I love the fact that Precious is out here. I was a Sunshine fan as well, but I get why we moved on here. The real life couple, they're married, for those of you who don't know, still married, are Jimmy Garvin, one of the miraculous stories in pro wrestling. Jimmy Garvin and Precious still together to this day, and which is cool. You talk about that Brainbuster, and I love that Jimmy Garvin adopted that from Killer Carl Cox and the storylines and things of that nature going back to Florida, and Jimmy just kind of kept with it. But you want to talk about dangerous Brainbusters, I have to think of Coco Beware and what I've been covering in my Memphis 85. Now, Coco can hit a damn Brainbuster. So, yeah, it can be very dangerous.
Yeah, and he could And he could also do a good drop kick, like we talked about in the UWF podcast, when he almost tore Gustavo Mendoza's head off.
Poor Mendoza. Yeah, that was a hell of a video. I mean, even Bill Watts knew he had money there. He put it in the intro immediately, and there it was to stay. So, but we're here at Larry Nelson interviewing Jimmy Garvin and Precious together. Larry Nelson asking the obvious question: where's the spray can? So Roman, maybe you kind of hit on something there. Precious claims someone stole her spray can. They can't find it anywhere. I think she just simply didn't have one upon their return from Montreal, is the gimmick in real life anyway of what's happening here. But so maybe they could have played into the suspension and said, well, she's not allowed to have it at the moment, but it will be back, guys. So rest assured the spray can will return. So Garvin states, we did our time, we paid our fines, but now we're back here in the AWA. Jimmy letting us know that things haven't changed. It's still not his fault, seeking the AWA World Heavyweight Championship and Rick Martel. High aspirations.
Yeah, he still wants a piece of Martel, and it was such a rare thing for me, at least back then. And I don't recall many times, storyline-wise, where the champion was challenging the challenger, because Garvin had jumped Martel, threw him face first into the steel ring post, and Martel's challenging the challenger. And I was like, wow, it was kind of a different way of going about things, but you totally understood why Martel wanted a piece of Garvin. He wanted revenge, but it's not often you hear the champion go, I want this guy. Normally it's a certain wrestler saying, I want a shot at the title.
And that's exactly what was playing out on the house shows prior to Garvin leaving for Montreal. We were seeing Rick Martel and Jimmy Garvin in a lot of the cities. And so maybe they'll bring it back. Maybe they won't. We'll have to wait and see what we do. We'll cover some of the house shows throughout time here. Larry Nelson asking Jimmy, if he's so great, why does he need Precious at ringside? Jimmy says, why? To take care of my needs, of course, referencing how far back his name goes in the wrestling business as an amateur and a pro. Jimmy started, what was he, like 14 when he was the valet of Terry Garvin? I mean, it goes pretty far back. Jimmy says he deserves a title shot from Rick Martel now that he's back here in the AWA. All I can say is, yeah. The gorgeous one is back.
Yeah, Jimmy Garvin always had that flamboyant personality, and there was always excitement with Jimmy Garvin, and that's a credit to him because he's not a big man. It's not like he's 270 pounds or whatever, but just he would get a reaction out of the crowd, and I saw it firsthand many times at the Showboat, especially when Precious came out. That spray can, when she started spraying that, people got so angry at her, but they were a great duo.
I saw Dick Worley, and we'll talk about that on the next episode, but Dick Worley inhaling nearly a half a can of that stuff, and the poor Dick, as Precious was spraying it all around the ring. We'll talk about that on the next episode of TV, though, as the spray can will return. Right now, we go back to the ring, though, direct from Camp Slaughter, I would presume, and some sort of torn-up mess of fatigues, what many people jokingly referred to as RAMBO. Greg Gagne here, taking on Kahlua, Mike Kahlua up there from the Northeast as well.
Yeah, the whole RAMBO fatigue. I mean, it was ridiculous then. It's ridiculous now, all these years later. It's just like, I guess they felt the need to kind of repackage Greg, maybe it had gotten a little stale in some people's eyes and, let's give him a new gimmick, but thankfully it was short-lived.
Well, having gone through Sergeant Slaughter's Cobra Corps training in that horrific video, which I posted on YouTube and social media, by the way, you guys can go try to dig back and find that. A lot of people really enjoyed that. It put a whole new light on the RAMBO Greg Gagne gimmick. I guess a lot of people had not seen that. Now, I had, I guess you could say, lucked out. And this is one of the very first tapes I ever purchased for $3 at a closeout store or something like that. And so the Sergeant Slaughter and Company tape is what I'm referencing there, put out by the AWA. And one of the things on there was the Greg Gagne training video. And so this is where we're at with the gimmick, though. Jim Brunzell has left the territory. Slaughter kind of references that your partner left you. He betrayed you. Jim Brunzell goes on to be a killer bee in the WWF, and Greg's left here. And now we got to figure out something to do with Greg. Do we give him a partner? Do we push him as singles? And right now the idea is to give him fatigues, but cool mid-'80s style. So he's got like a half-torn shirt. It's like tied off on the side. I don't know if that's a great combination that you want to work with there, but it is where we are. It is where it is.
Yeah, and Rambo was a big deal. And, of course, Slaughter was immensely popular in the WWF. He was popular in the AWA as well. So maybe they were hoping Greg would get a little rub off teaming with Slaughter.
Greg had really trimmed down, not that he was ever big, but Greg had really trimmed down to this point where he just kind of had a roofer's body or something. Like he just looked like some normal dude out there where his pants looked like they were going to fall off of him, working in normal pants like this. So it was just an awkward look, and I'm glad it's short-lived here in 1985. But, man, what the hell were they thinking? I get on paper, they're like, yeah, that's cool. You're going to train with Sergeant Slaughter. He's going to make you tougher. You're going to learn a new style. And I'm okay with that. And they filmed the video. He's like, yeah, man, I ran out of the water and I slipped in the mud and I'm chopping wood. And okay, I guess I'm not really on board with it, but okay. But then this look, I don't know, man. It just doesn't work for me.
Well, that, and it didn't really play out, like his toughness. It wasn't like,
right.
Heels jumped him and beat him up and he came back and I'm a lot stronger and tougher because of Camp Slaughter. It was just a video, like you said, of him chopping wood. I mean, they could have done that with me, they do that with Greg and nobody noticed a difference in his in-ring. And, he was still Greg Gagne. He wasn't a bad worker, but him training at Camp Slaughter didn't push him to new heights by any stretch.
Well, I'm going to get heat for this, but, and I'm not saying his in-ring work was not as good as this next gentleman I'm going to reference, but the look, I bought Corporal Kirchner as more of an army man, a soldier, if you will, than Greg Gagne.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So
yes, exactly. Greg looked like somebody playing an army guy on a sitcom or something, or trying to, it just didn't seem believable at all.
Well, here this week, he's got Mike King Kahlua, the future King Kahlua, though not quite king yet. Another Philly boy, a mainstay for the Savoldies, ICW, the NWF, the Tri-States with good heart. Larry Sharp, the early ECW. Kahlua, just another one of those Northeastern guys. And the referee for this one, I recognize this fella. It is Dick Worley. I love seeing Dick. Dick Worley was like my favorite, even though he was pretty much done by the time I started watching wrestling right around this time period. I loved, anytime I got the Coliseum videos or whatever, I always loved Dick Worley.
Yeah, the veteran Dick Worley, he's, when you think of WWF wrestlers, you think of a guy like Dick Worley, and when you think of the bad WWF referees, you think of Gilberto Roman. It's funny how some of these names just stick with you.
So Worley out here in his bell bottoms. Do you think that's why Verne hired him for this show? I mean, Verne loves to work behind the times. Dick Worley's still out here in his bell bottoms. He's been wearing since 1972. If you don't believe me, guys, go watch the old All-Star Wrestlings. I mean, he's been wearing these pants for never changed. Dick, I love Dick Worley. It's good to see he hasn't given up the classics. As he did not go on the road with the World Wrestling Federation. I believe Dick had a shoot job. Jamie talked to me about what it was. I forget the company he said he worked for. So Worley could never really leave the Northeast, or specifically this particular area of the Northeast. And so we get him here. He's stay put. He's no longer working for the WWF. So he's here with Verne while they're in town in Atlantic City. So he's relegated to working wherever he can, whenever he can get it. And that's why we get him here on our TV. But I'm happy for it. And of course, this is the new and improved Greg Gagne. Get a showcase match here. And you got to put your son on the debut edition, do you not?
Yeah, especially when you're on commentary and you're saying how it helped him going to Camp Slaughter and everything. So Verne's trying to get it over. He's got his son on there, and he's trying to get over the Camp Slaughter storyline.
That's right. Nepotism at its best. Make sure your son is featured on the very first step. At least he wasn't the first match, right? I mean, at least he wasn't the first match.
Or he wasn't winning the heavyweight title or anything.
Ugh. I shudder that thought. The Rambo thing, I suppose, is their best idea for Greg after the departure of Jim Brunzell. So this is what we got, and this is what we're working with. Kahlua with a cheap shot in the corner as the match gets going. Gagne firing back. Kahlua backdrops himself before bailing to the floor there. Gagne never really gave him the move. Kahlua just kind of threw himself over Greg. And I can't help it. Nothing about Gagne's lanky body in the mid-'80s says Marine Corps training. As I'm sitting here and I'm looking at a couple of pictures here, I took some screen caps as I was doing the show, and I mean, just looking at the attire and Greg Gagne, you can't take him the least bit serious. Not as a wrestler, like you said, he's perfectly fine as a wrestler. He gets a lot of heat because his father was Verne. Maybe at times he was pushed and things were done with him that didn't need to be done, but in general, he deserved a spot on the card. He was certainly capable of getting it done in the ring. I enjoyed his stuff with Jim Brunzell specifically, but I feel, and I know this wasn't their intention, but it's just the gear. You can't get over the gear to take him seriously. And again, new fan flipping the channel. I turn it on. What is this?
Yeah, I guarantee you the wrestling fans and the non-wrestling fans were having a good hearty chuckle when they turned on ESPN and saw Gagne in the military outfit.
Well, Gagne's in here. He's still holding his own against Kahlua. So back inside, Kahlua comes. It's some technical wrestling from both sides. Gagne naturally out-wrestling Kahlua. Kahlua, though, taking over with the big Polynesian chop, dropping Greg Gagne, then throat first across the top rope. Going to get a 2 count. Kahlua with a near fall on Greg Gagne. As we learned, 5 minutes are gone, thanks to Gary Michael Capetta keeping track there. Kahlua going to work a chin lock to kill a little more time before Gagne finally freeing himself, planting a super kick. That was new, at least to me. Super kick from Gagne to Kahlua's throat. Gagne landing a suplex, but missing a drop kick. So Kahlua's still in the fight this late in the matchup, looking to capitalize. Kahlua going to the top rope, but Greg back up, meeting Kahlua up there, slamming him off the top. Pair of drop kicks later, and the Gagne sleeper getting the win in 7 minutes and 17 seconds. Bit long for, well, an extended squash, I believe is what they call these.
Well, yeah, it's Greg, so we got to give him as much TV time as we can,
that's
But I had wrote down about the super kick too, because it's something I've seen 1,000,000,001 Gagne matches in person and on TV, and I don't ever recall him doing the super kick. And back then, that was a move that not everybody and their mother did, like nowadays. It was very rare to see it, and I still think to this day that Chris Adams had the best one. I know a lot of people like Shawn Michaels' chin music, and we had talked about Savannah Jack having a decent one, whatever. But Chris Adams was the measuring stick when it came to super kicks. So when somebody else did it, it was kind of like, whoa, like, what are they doing? That's not their move. That's Chris Adams' move. It was like somebody else doing a DDT back in the day. It's like, that's Jake's move.
I was, pleasantly surprised that Greg was trying something new. I guess they're going back to that Slaughter train. We know how often Sergeant Slaughter was throwing super kicks. Boy, that would have been a sight to see. But no, it was kind of cool to me to see Greg try something different, and it didn't look bad. Now he doesn't have the aim of Chris Adams, so he catches Kahlua in the throat. Gonna have to ask Mike how that felt if he remembers, but I'm surprised he didn't keep that more in his repertoire moving forward, because it didn't look terrible.
Yeah, and then they could have played that up that, he's so quick, he threw that kick, and, the opponent didn't even see it coming or something like that, because Greg was one of those guys that they always emphasize his speed and quickness, due to the fact that he wasn't 280 pounds. He was a smaller wrestler.
And then we get something from Verne here on commentary as we wrap up the match that we would hear a lot. Gordon would do this a lot back in the day as well with guys who perform that sleeper hold. Verne reminding the children, don't try this at home, because that was a very dangerous move. I guess at some point kids were doing this quite a bit. And, it was, you could kill somebody by performing this move properly. I mean.
Yeah. And oftentimes I would hear at least, the dangers of it. Sometimes you'd hear an announcer say, oh, police used to do that to subdue criminals. And, this is a dangerous move. And, these are professionals. Don't you try it on your friends. And, they would kind of give you that public service announcement for the young kids out there, because there were stories, and I'm sure you've heard them too, Ray, of somebody that would pile drive their friend or whatever and break their neck, and it's like, wow, so they, back then they would try to tell you, don't do these moves on your friends.
We, I remember I had to have been about 6th grade recess, and we had alternating recesses. So half of the kids were out for 30 minutes or whatever it was, and then we would go out. And when the other classes were out there and we were inside eating lunch, one of the kids, it was right after The Undertaker debuted, and he tombstoned another kid right on, I think it was just in the grass, but, hard ground, grass, and they called an ambulance. I don't remember whatever came of that, but it was just like, oh my God. Oof. Yeah. So kids don't try this at home is right. That's going back to 1990, or early 91, if you will. So,
right.
But here we go. Greg Gagne gets a win on the very first episode of ESPN. We go to Larry Nelson after a commercial break. He's going to speak with the living legend, Larry Zbyszko, as they discuss Larry's new interview talk show, In This Corner. Larry Zbyszko with his own talk show. Sounds good. It's going to debut right here today on the program. And his first guest, Larry Zbyszko, that is, starting straight at the top. He's going to be speaking with the AWA World Heavyweight Champion, Rick Martel. Zbyszko mentioning that Larry Nelson will be hosting In This Corner, which is Larry Zbyszko's talk show. So very confused about this. Let's save that for later, but I want a little feedback now, but we're going to talk a lot more about this later in the show.
Okay. Well, just briefly, it was anytime Zbyszko had a talking segment, I enjoyed it. That Zbyszko was always great on the mic and always entertaining. But yeah, we can delve into that a little bit later as the episode gets going.
I do have questions for you because I got to get somebody's input on this. I mean, maybe it's just me that I'm bothered by things. I'll leave it that way. And we'll talk about it when we get there later in the program. But looking forward to the debut edition. We've had Piper's Pit, but in the AWA, it's now In This Corner with Larry Zbyszko. And if anything else Larry knows how to do, it's talk. So we'll see what happens there with that. And I got to laugh as we hear the fans begin to chant Bruno, Bruno in the background. Larry Zbyszko has to ignore it here because, well, that's what happens when you're up in Jersey. You're taping in Jersey, Verne. What do you expect is going to happen? They're going to reference Bruno here. The fans chanting for Bruno Sammartino, but the fans in Jersey, they remember, Roman.
Oh, they definitely remember. And of course, it is of no benefit for Verne to mention what the crowd's chanting. You know, right. Back then they didn't like to acknowledge wrestlers past or whatever. So Verne's not going to say, hey, listen to the crowd chant for Bruno, you know, so he's going to just kind of act like it never happened.
It also doesn't help the matters that Bruno has recently returned to the WWF. His son David's wrestling there. Bruno's come out of retirement to team with David. So it's still new on their mind. Bruno's back in the World Wrestling Federation. He's working with the competition, the devil right now, if you will, as far in Verne Gagne's eyes.
Yeah, the East Coast fans, they're never going to forget Bruno and his legendary status and how many times he sold out the Garden. So anytime they're back on the East Coast, it's not a surprise to hear the Bruno chant going on with the crowd.
That tells you how impactful that feud was between Larry and Bruno, though. That happened back in 1908. 5 years later, they're still chanting for Bruno. First thoughts on their mind. And Larry's done a lot in between there, but he's back in the wrong area of the world to be combating the fans of the Northeast in regards to their hero, Bruno Sammartino. So we hear that In This Corner, debuting later, and then in comes Greg Gagne. He butts in for an interview time. Just worked a match. I mean, Garvin got his interview time, so Greg going to get his. Zbyszko going to back away, but not before saying, oh, excuse me, Mr. Rambo. So I had to pop for that because at no point was Greg Gagne actually referred to as RAMBO Greg Gagne. That was a name that the fans sort of gave him, or the smart fans gave him, Dave Meltzer, the internet, etc., because we're kind of mocking the gimmick. But I love the fact that Larry just calls it out right out of the gate here.
Oh, I thought that was hilarious. And even if Zbyszko didn't do it, I can tell you fans were already thinking that, or, you know, who's this wannabe G.I. Joe? You know, like nobody took the character of RAMBO Greg Gagne serious.
Well, we got to take him seriously now. He scored his very first win here on ESPN. Greg talking about that victory here, putting over Kahlua as an up-and-comer. So that's pretty cool. He can ask for much more than that. But then they pivot to the sleeper hold, the Gagne sleeper. Verne used it for decades, and we see Greg use it here today on TV. Apparently, Nick Bockwinkel has brought back the Oriental sleeper, which was a story they did years ago. So we're pretending like it just happened or something, or at least that's the way it sounded here on the interview. But the Oriental sleeper, Bockwinkel brought it back from Japan with him. Looks eerily similar to the regular sleeper hold. Greg says that he can confirm that the Oriental sleeper is nothing more than a chokehold based on first-hand experience. Greg then discussing his sleeper, the Gagne sleeper, before reminding us once again, kids, don't try this at home. It's a very dangerous move. Greg stating that the LAPD killed 16 men with the sleeper hold before it was outlawed. So there you go, Roman.
Yeah, the pile driver, sleeper, whatnot, don't try to be like these pro wrestlers. They're professionally trained.
So dangerous, the LAPD had to nix it. They could no longer use it on suspects and things of that nature, I suppose. So I guess they'll just have to use their guns or something along those lines instead. But Greg Gagne, basically, it sounds like, I'm not saying they're setting up a feud with Bockwinkel, but they're continuing to burn that flame of the old Gagne family Bockwinkel story. Yeah, well, it was something that they, like you said, just could keep going on and on and on, and they did. Gagne and Bockwinkel feuded forever and a day, almost like Jimmy Valiant and Paul Jones' Army. You know, it's just one of those feuds that just wouldn't go away. Oh, Ray Russell feeling so low after you remind me of that Roman Gomez. Oh, the Boogie Paul Jones feud. I'm glad I'm not in Mid-Atlantic right now here on Regional Rasslin, but someday, folks, stay tuned. Larry Nelson talking with a slew of people. We come out of a commercial break. Now he's talking with the former AWA World Champion Nick Bockwinkel and the legendary crippler Ray Stevens out here as a tandem of the former tag team champions back in the 1970s. But not before Larry gets a chance, Nelson that is, to talk and thank the people of Palm Beach for his country club blazer. I don't know if you're really deeply paying attention to the interviews, the commentary on this show, but I don't know how many times Nelson and Verne put over Palm Beach and the country club blazers.
I never really noticed that, to tell you the truth. When it came to the clothing, I never really paid attention to them putting over the place in Palm Beach.
I would imagine it's stationed in Palm Beach based on the name, but I guess, I Googled it, like, what is this? Why do they keep referencing? Apparently it was a thing, or maybe still a thing. I'm not familiar with it. I don't know blazers that well, but I guess it was very respectable. Was Palm Beach Country Club Blazers, and they're actually going to reference them again in week number 2, Roman. So you always have that to look forward to when we get there. So, we see Nick Bockwinkel here sweating heavily. So clearly he had just worked a match that didn't make air, but the heels putting over their credentials, their track record as former champions, noting that they don't mind hurting people to get that W. Bockwinkel talking his version of the sleeper hold versus the Gagne sleeper, or maybe it's the Gagne choke, says Nick. Yeah, the tables have turned here. So Nick Bockwinkel basically saying, how do we know it's not your sleeper, Greg? That's the chokehold, and mine's legit. And Ray Stevens also putting over the patented crippler pile driver as the heels sit here and pat each other on the back.
Yeah, it was basically a love fest between those two, complimenting about the accomplishments and everything. And I was glad I was finally able to see Stevens in person. He was a legendary wrestler, and then the moniker of the crippler, I still remember him, the damage he did to Jimmy Snuka on WWF TV and bloodied him, and that kind of made you believe, like, damn, this guy is a crippler. He's a savage. Look what he did to Jimmy Snuka, so it's something I always remember as a kid, him doing that to Snuka. So to see him in person wrestling was kind of cool. Like, man, I'm finally getting to see a legend.
And I'm not going to, paint everything with rose-colored glasses and pretend like Ray Stevens in 1985 is the Ray Stevens of the 1960s or even the 1970s. But on any given night when Ray wanted to turn it on, I'm not saying again that he was out there bumping like he was in his prime by any means, but he could turn it on. He could go. And I love that they get a couple of grizzled veterans that you may know the name. You may have heard the names. If you collected magazines, if you were watching wrestling long enough, you've probably heard one or both of these names. So to introduce them to the ESPN audience, I thought that was a job well done, because these guys aren't working this show, but they're just here for the promo.
Right. Some of those names, Stevens, like you said, he was known in the Northeast too. So that was a good call in having him on the show.
So Ray Stevens, Nick Bockwinkel, clearly part of the AWA here still in 1985. We'll see what they wind up doing here in the weeks to come.
Relive the glory days of Memphis wrestling with the Retro Wrestling Review USWA podcast. Each week, we go back in time to review USWA Championship Wrestling from the 1990s, episode by episode. Join us for watch-alongs, behind-the-scenes stories, and exclusive interviews with people who were there and lived it. Whether you grew up watching it or you're discovering it for the first time, this podcast is your ringside seat to Memphis wrestling history. It's all a part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Listen now at uswapodcast.com.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here. Lots of new stuff happening here at WrestleCopia, and I want to update you on everything going on with the brand right now. First and simple, if you haven't checked out our website at WrestleCopia.com, it's a great way to keep up with the latest episodes of all of your favorite Copia programming, from the Wrestling Memory Grenade to Regional Rasslin with the Territory Talk, the Wrestling Stoop with the legendary Bob Roop, Professor Dan Ginnity and the Pro Wrestling Academy, and all the other great podcasts from Gene Jackson, Bob Smith, Dave Dynasty, and the boys from the Other Ship. And of course, all of those programs also available at your favorite podcast streaming platforms. And if you want to stay up to date with everything going on in the Copia world, all the latest news, random thoughts, fun videos, pictures, and more, make sure to join the more than 33,000 followers over at Facebook.com/WrestlingGrenade. Don't be left out. Please also follow us at the former Twitter, now X, at Wrestling Grenade, and subscribe to youtube.com/WrestlingGrenade. Would also greatly appreciate you leaving us a 5-star review at your favorite podcast apps, guys, because every positive review makes our podcasts more visible in the algorithms, if you will, which allows us to continue to grow. Now, for those who have been asking about merchandise, WrestleCopia merch, you can find plenty of designs for our t-shirts, hats, magnets, stickers, coffee mugs, and more over at the TeePublic store. That is tpublic.com/user/WrestleCopia. And last but definitely not least, it's what keeps the entire machine going. I'm talking about patreon.com/WrestleCopia. Now with 3 major tiers and tons of Patreon exclusive next level content for our supporters. Remember, guys, no subscription, cancel any time, but I think you'll like the content that we're offering there for any budget you may have. And you can sign up right now, patreon.com/WrestleCopia. We appreciate your support in helping us pay the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network running and enabling us to continue to bring you all the quality programming that we offer.
Hey, it's Bob Smith, and guess what? The Outdated Wrestling Hour is now part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. But hey, no fear, you're still going to hear the unique guests, comedy, music, authors, journalists, funny people. Who knows who's going to end up on the Outdated Wrestling Hour? Remember, it's all new and all old. So check it out in the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and wherever you get your podcasts. Listen if you know what's good for you.
From there, we move on to an old school training video of the AWA champion Rick Martel. Now, we've seen these done in Georgia Championship Wrestling. I've seen it done in Puerto Rico, many places. Florida used to do it without the music anyway. But here we are in the AWA, Rick Martel, set to the music the AWA used for their VHS releases. And if you want to know what that is, look no further than the RAMBO Greg Gagne training vignette. And that's what they use here again for Rick Martel's training vignette.
I was cracking up to hear the kids' classic music to Martel training in the park, carrying around somebody on his shoulders, giving him a piggyback ride and just these goofy training things. But to the kids' classic music, I was laughing. I couldn't stop laughing at that.
Yeah, well, they're trying, but it's like unintentionally funny is some of the stuff they're doing. And it wasn't just anybody that was helping Rick Martel train. It was, in fact, Greg Gagne.
Yep.
So Greg Gagne aiding Martel in the training. Nothing like the Slaughter training, by the way. They're actually standing out here in a park somewhere, a public park, and this segment going on entirely too long. We see Rick Martel squatting Greg Gagne in a fireman's carry, running through the park with Greg on his shoulders, seated on his shoulders like the Road Warrior, the Doomsday Device or something like that. So we've got Greg Gagne literally sitting on the back of Rick Martel as Rick is running through this park. I was so hoping Gagne would just go face first into a tree branch. That would have been classic.
That would have toughened him up for his next opponent, He'd fallen off Martel's shoulders onto the concrete.
Kids, don't try this at home. Greg Gagne taking a bump off a tree branch, but just kind of some odd training here. Now, Rick, very impressive with the headstand and the neck bridges and things like that. But outside of that, I don't know what they're. It's like we don't have any weights, so let's just use Greg as the weights here. Let's run around with Greg on the shoulders of Rick Martel. There's other joggers and things running by. You have to wonder what are they doing?
Yeah, and the length of the video was definitely too long. And it's one of those things that it's quality over quantity. I look back to when Mr. Wrestling 2 trained Magnum TA in those videos, or Magnum TA is doing a knee lift onto a bag of wheat because Mr. Wrestling 2 was teaching him the knee lift, and you'd see the bag of wheat explode, because of the power of the knee lift. That was effective, but this running around giving piggyback rides in the park and all that is just it's a little too cheesy for me.
Yeah, well, we get the video, but then we come in because it's time for the debut edition. Here it is of In This Corner with Larry Zbyszko. He's going to be interviewing the AWA champion. We just saw him working out in the park, talking about Rick Martel. And of course, In This Corner, hosted by Larry. Nelson? I didn't understand this. Please explain this to me, Roman. Larry Zbyszko is is the host. Larry is the host of In This Corner. But Larry Nelson is also involved here. He's not just involved. He's going to wind up being the guy asking the questions and seated in the middle in between Martel and Zbyszko. What is going on here?
I can't explain that. You know, when Johnny Carson had the Tonight Show, it wasn't Ed McMahon asking the questions and then casually asking Johnny. Like it said, the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. So he's the host. Why is Larry Nelson even in there? Even if his role was minimal, which it wasn't oftentimes, why is he even in that equation if it's Larry's show, Larry Zbyszko show?
Yeah, Nelson seated in between the two, and basically the guy kind of asking the questions. So it's it's kind of like Larry just lashing out, making, with Rick Martel snide comments, but with the heels just kind of supporting what they're having to say. They're doubling down whatever they're saying, but it's just really odd. I don't think Verne clearly okayed this idea, whoever came up with it. I doubt it was Verne. Maybe it was Larry Zbyszko who pitched this to Verne, but clearly Verne doesn't understand what a talk show is.
No, and years later, it would get even worse, or around that time, they would have a celebrity corner or whatever, where they would have somebody on the wrestling show that was performing at the Stardust here in Vegas, and they would interview them for 10 minutes or whatever. I'm like, don't you guys know what an interview segment's supposed to be? Like, somebody performing at the Stardust is not adding to a wrestling show. And, you know, Larry Nelson there as the third party, like I didn't understand that for the life of me.
Very confusing. Larry Nelson seated on a bench in the locker room, Zbyszko to our right, Martel to our left here on the TV screen. Nelson in the middle, Zbyszko referencing his 12 glorious years in the business, and that number would change depending on where he was or when he was, but it was 12 glorious years here. In regards to this particular episode, Zbyszko goes on that any idiot can run. He saw the video. He saw the music video, the workout of Rick Martel. He says, any idiot can run. Any idiot can pump weights. And Rick Martel visibly beginning to get exasperated here, perhaps a little annoyed at Zbyszko's comments. Martel finally getting a chance to speak here in this talk show, if you will, pointing out that he's been the AWA champion. Well, he says a year and a half. It's more like 14 months, but tomato. Martel saying that I beat Jumbo Sharuda in May of 1984, and it takes more than just an idiot to hold a world title for that long.
Yeah, and Zbyszko was all over him saying, well, who have you defended against? You know, like, it's easy to be a champion for a long time when you don't ever put the belt up, you know? So he was definitely needling Martel during this segment.
Yeah, it's frustrating when you get a heel who can talk, like Larry. Nobody's ever going to deny that Zbyszko can talk. And you get in there with a guy who was never a great promo, but was an okay, adequate promo, Rick Martel. But then, of course, you know, French-Canadian, he has the accent. And Martel doing great facials here, great visual of getting frustrated with Larry. But at the same time, Rick is never going to match word for word with Zbyszko. And you really don't want to do that with your expose your world champion like that.
I was thinking the exact same thing. Martel's assets were in the ring. Yeah. It was not on the mic. And as good as Larry was, you can't have those two getting in a verbal battle because it just is not going to come out good.
Now, if this was real life, I'd say kudos to Larry Zbyszko because he's getting the go. He's got Rick Martel by the tail, right? It's like, I showed him up. I'm coming for the world title, but here you're trying to protect your champion because we're all a team here, essentially, at the end of the day right now, trying to make money. But Zbyszko refuting Rick Martel, talking about beating Jumbo for the belt back in May of last year. He says anybody can claim to be a great champion, hold the belt for 14 or 15 months, but only defend it twice. Zbyszko stating Martel hasn't really defended it against anybody of merit. Now, of course, he's talking out his ass. He's being a heel. Because I had to go and look, obviously, myself, to go see just some of the names that Rick Martel defended the title against over the last year. Nick Bockwinkel, rematches with Jumbo, Billy Robinson, Harley Race, Bob Backlund, all former world champions, by the way, Mr. Saito, Jimmy Garvin, Jim Brunzell, King Tonga, Michael Hayes, and even Larry Zbyszko up in Winnipeg recently. So I guess Zbyszko has a short memory, I suppose.
Or maybe he was just trying to get the best of Martel, the way Jimmy Garvin used to or whatever. But just got me thinking about this with Martel. He's your world heavyweight champion. This is your debut show on ESPN. Why is Martel not wrestling?
That's an excellent
Wouldn't you want to showcase him? Wouldn't you want to showcase him to the new people that are just clicking around on ESPN? Wrestling. Let me see what this is about. You don't have your world champion wrestling?
That's a very, very good call, Roman. I mean, he will, spoiler alert, he'll be part of week number 2. But no, to have your very first show out here, you want to showcase the best you have. And we have some big names here this week. We saw Jimmy Garvin. We're going to see several more here before we close the show. But yeah, you would think Rick Martel would be factored in to the very first episode in the ring versus getting to know you. And we really didn't get to know Rick, because if we were doing this by points, Larry Zbyszko would have came out the winner here of this quote-unquote talk show. But Martel defending himself, to which Zbyszko calls him, "You're an emotionally disturbed person. You're not as poised as a champion should be." So Larry, calm and cool, burying Rick Martel. "You're emotionally disturbed because you're angry and upset," says Martel can't handle the criticism. So Larry essentially making a fool of the AWA world champion.
Yeah, like I said, Martel's best assets were wrestling. You don't have him wrestle. You have him on the mic. Okay, that's one thing. But now you're having him embarrassed while he's on the mic. And I'm like, yeah, that's not good. That's not a good way to start off your debut show.
Well, Martel, though, making it clear he has never backed down from a challenge. He will not back down from Larry Zbyszko. But unfortunately, we are out of time here in this segment. So we'll have to wait and see what comes of all of this in the upcoming weeks between Rick Martel and Larry Zbyszko, if anything. We're going to have to look at some of the house shows maybe to figure out some of the results there. Speaking of house shows, at this point, we go back several weeks here to the St. Paul Civic Center, July 14th, a VTR of a matchup involving the AWA World Tag Team Champions, the Road Warriors, with manager Paul Ellering by their side, taking on the recently arriving Long Riders, which is Scott and Bill Irwin.
I was excited for this matchup. I've always liked tag team wrestling, and these were 4 hard hitters. And the thought of this being on TV, I was jacked up for this.
So this is kind of the segment they would eventually call their Mat Classic. A lot of times we would go back in time to see a house show matchup, a very competitive match. But in this instance, it's very recent. Within the last month and, say, 6 weeks ago, I guess, is when this match took place. And it was basically upon the arrival of the Long Riders coming right in to work with the Roadies. But it's very interesting because the Road Warriors are still, they're tweening. They're kind of baby faces now, but they're also kind of heels. But by this point, at least on the road, they're working as baby faces here in this particular match.
Yeah, people were going to cheer for the Road Warriors no matter what they did. They were one of those guys. I mean, when they turned on Sting, in the NWA, people still cheered. When they poked out Dusty's, or not poked out his eye, but when they took the spike to Dusty's eye, people liked that. Like, the Road Warriors they're some of the wrestlers that no matter what they do, people are going to cheer. Jake was that way, and so was Hawk and Animal.
Right, yeah, and the Macho Man eventually too. They have to make these baby face turns, and it's really already happened at this point. But the next episode of AWA on ESPN is going to counteract that. But we'll talk about that when we get there in regards to where the Roadies are right now. They're kind of feuding with the Freebirds. Now they're having issues with the Long Riders. We're going to see that here. Referee Jim Mitchell, who had done jobs for the AWA for years prior, tries to restore some order right out of the gate here as the Irwins jump the Roadies on their way into the ring. And for once, we have a team on par with the size of Hawk and Animal. Maybe not the muscles, but certainly the size.
Yeah, and it's one of those ones, Ray, had the, I don't want to jump, but it's way, many, many years ago, but had the Irwins won the World Tag Team titles here, I would not have been upset, or I wouldn't have classified it as an upset. The Irwins, the Long Riders, were a very believable tag team.
I know you've put them over in the past. We've talked about the Long Riders when we were covering the UWF in '86. I know Jamie was a big fan of the Super Destroyer side of the Irwins.
Yes.
I never was a fan of the Long Riders together. Bill Irwin in bits and pieces. Scott Irwin, I loved Scott Irwin, but together, it never worked for me. It never really clicked for me until I watched this particular match. You want to talk about what Jim Ross would call a slobber knocker. That's what this was. This was two teams beating the crap out of each other, and I thoroughly enjoyed it for the times. Road Warriors getting jumped early on, but come battling back. They do take over as we get some semblance of a normal tag team match. The Irwins, though, take over, going to work over Animal. Then Hawk's turn. He tags in. Now Hawk getting the beatdown. Hawk finally able to hit that hot tag out to partner Animal, who lands a power slam on Scott, power slam on Brother Bill, then a double noggin knocker on the Irwins, leading us to a four-way melee. Big boot by Road Warrior Hawk on Wild Bill, as referee Mitchell ushering Bill back to his corner. The Roadies going tit for tat. We saw the Irwins cheating during the matchup. Hawk standing on the apron, dropping Scott Irwin throat first across the top rope. Takes a big bump into the air, down to the ground goes the Hog. An Animal dropping an equally big elbow drop to get the 1, 2, 3. And we get about 7 minutes of a hell of a competitive match shown. It's edited down from the event, but still lots of meat left here, man. Good match.
Oh, definitely a good match. And what they showed makes you think about what you didn't see. But 7 minutes of exciting action, and this was a good match to put on your debut show.
No, I thought they made it. It definitely helped the Road Warriors. It's definitely established. If you hadn't seen the Road Warriors or didn't know who they were, and looking at their opponents, go, boy, these guys are two big bad bikers out here. And these guys, Hawk and Animal, they just look like world beaters. And they get the win. They cheat to win. They're heels anyway, kinda. But I think the Irwins had it coming, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it didn't hurt the Irwins to do the job here because of the cheap finish, if you will, with Hawk cheating as well. But I want to bring this back, and I don't say that often about Long Rider matches, but these two teams were meant for each other, at least here in 1985, and man, talk about clubbering, if you will, baby.
Yeah, and it's kind of a shame that they didn't have more of a longer feud, because it was competitive, and it is nice to see the Road Warriors in a match that lasts longer than 30 seconds. I mean, I get why they ran roughshod over everybody to establish their dominance, but this was a good team for them to go longer than 30 seconds. A good 10-minute match or whatever. Definitely worth watching.
Well, we've got more action back here at the Tropicana. So the Road Warriors retain the World Tag Team titles. We're going to see the Roadies here next week. A little bit about that at the end of this program. But right now it's 6-man tag team action featuring the Fabulous Freebirds. That is the originals. Michael Hayes, Terry Gordy, Buddy Roberts, battling the 3-man team of Curt Hennig, Tom Zenk, and that piece of shit Buck Zumhofe.
I was excited to see the Freebirds. I was always a big mark for them, and to see them was great. Later on, I became more of a fan of Curt Hennig than I was at this time. So to me, it was cool to see Gordy and Hennig in the ring, two future champions, Gordy, the UWF heavyweight champion, and of course, Curt Hennig would later be the AWA heavyweight champion. But to see them before they became major individual stars like that, it was kind of cool to see them in this tag match.
Well, I know Curt got that run with Eddie Gilbert there in the WWF underneath. I know Curt got a little bit of a push there in Portland for a while as well, but it wasn't really in the AWA that he really got turned up a notch until Larry Hennig comes in and they start teaming up, which had already happened at this point a little bit. So Curt is slowly finding himself here in 1985. Very cool thing there. Tom Zenk, for those of you who recognize that name, he's going to be part of the Can-Am connection with Rick Martel and later on the Z-Man in WCW, and Buck Zumhofe's there as well. Referee Dick Worley, as the bell sounds were underway, starting off the match, Curt Hennig and Michael Hayes. Never thought I'd see that in my lifetime. Curt Hennig and Michael Hayes in the ring together. Now later on, Roman, here's a fun fact for you. Those two would team up to host WWF Challenge in the summer of 96 at 3 a.m. in my market.
Yeah, it's interesting the way things work out sometimes, down the road, guys that broke in together or something like that and find out later on they ended up being tag partners or wrestling at a WrestleMania against each other or something. It's kind of interesting when stuff like that happens.
I could hear Michael sitting there on the Doc Hendricks couch when they go to commercial. It's funny that you ever think one day, we were working together in 1985. Do you ever think one day we'd be sitting here on a couch promoting recaps from Monday Night Raw? But that's where they go. But that's a bit of a ways down the road. Right now, Curt Hennig working his way up. The Freebirds are already established, already there. And as things get going, beautiful crossbody out of the gate by Curt Hennig on Terry Gordy. Got to get a 2 count. Doug McLeod, though, going to put over Terry Gordy's Oriental Spike that he brought back from Japan. Lots of shit being coming back from Japan here. We've got the Oriental Sleeper, the Oriental Spike. I mean, there's a lot of cool things over there in Japan.
Yeah, you go to Japan, you get a new repertoire of moves to bring back to the States.
So Curt Hennig, he was a flip-flopper anyway in the ring. Very impressive crossbody that he lands on that big 300-pound Terry Gordy. But holy shit, Terry Gordy busting out a middle rope reverse crossbody block on Curt. I wrote, wow, I didn't see that coming. I didn't have that on my bingo card.
Yeah, Gordy was one of the most agile big men, and Gordy was one of those guys that he was a big man, but he wasn't a super, super heavyweight. He wasn't a Kamala or an Andre or anything, but there weren't many people his size, like a him or a Bam Bam Bigelow.
Right.
But yeah, definitely very agile, and he could bump. Besides being when he was on the offense, he had a lot of agility on offense and on defense, the way he could move around.
He was a hell of a bumper, but just to see him perform a flying crossbody, a reverse crossbody block and make it look good. I mean, it wasn't just like, okay, he flew. I mean, it was very impressive there from Bam Bam early on. Tom Zenk going to tag in, evading the heel corner, very wise, but Buddy Roberts going to play the bump machine for the baby faces, per the usual. As a Freebird suck chant rings out, then it's rock and roll, POS, Buck Zumhofe, call him what you will. It's his turn to get in the ring. He lands a shot on all three of the birds, the baby faces then. Quick tags in and out, working over Freebird Buddy Roberts. Hayes eventually able to nail Tom Zenk in the back as he was coming off the ropes. Cheating birds finally taken over 8 minutes into the matchup. So the birds giving away 8 minutes of offense to the baby faces here, which is kind of interesting. But again, I feel like we got extended squash coming up, but we'll have to wait and see. The ropes clearly loose, and it leads to some really sloppy spots here later in the matchup. Even the cameraman taking a bump off the apron at one point, trying to hold on to the rope as the guys were hitting the ropes, and the poor cameraman taking a spill. Hazard pay coming your way. Michael Hayes with a side slam on Tom Zenk, going to get a 2 count, but Tom able to tag back to rock and roll as we are now 10 minutes into the matchup, and I don't know how many times at this point that Verne Gagne has told us that we are watching a phenomenal tag match. It's probably not phenomenal when you have to be told it 10 times, Roman.
Yeah, that could be overdoing it a little bit, but I did think it was a good match.
It was a solid match for TV, certainly for the era, but I'm just, Verne was putting this over like, this is it. This is the best you're going to see. And I don't know if that's how you want to sell this, because no offense, but if this is the best I'm told I'm ever going to see, I don't know if I'm flipping the channel. I'm not talking as a wrestling fan. I'm talking as somebody who may become a wrestling fan.
Right.
But yeah, for all intents and purposes, it's a very solid match. Nothing wrong with it. This has been tolerable, and I'll leave it there. But Gordy clotheslining drops Buck Zumhofe in the center of the ring. The birds begin to take back over on the offense. Zumhofe finally escaping the grasp of the birds, able to make the tag. No, he decides he wants to get revenge instead, does Buck Zumhofe, taking it to Michael Hayes. So Rock and Roll had the opportunity, I hate when that happens, and decides I could make the tag, but I'd rather fight him off myself.
Yeah, whenever you got a chance to get a fresh man in the ring and help you out, you need to take advantage of it. It is called a tag team match.
Well, Buck Zumhofe in this for himself at the moment, it would appear anyway, and it never works out too well for the guy that makes these decisions. And it doesn't take long for the Freebird brothers to enter the ring, try to go 3-on-1, but the babyface is following in suit, and it becomes a Pier Sixer. Katie bar the door, all 6 men in the ring. Dick Worley trying to get Tom Zenk and Curt Hennig back to their corner when Michael Hayes and Buddy Roberts team up to double backdrop Buck Zumhofe into a Gordy powerbomb. And the crowd goes absolutely nuts. I popped, Roman. Even the commentators popped because Gordy basically dumped Zumhofe on the back of his head, shoulder blades here, for an awesome powerbomb.
Yeah, it was very impressive. And, something that made this match a very good match was just the Freebirds' ability to sell.
Terry and Buddy were both great bumpers anyway, but I mean, specifically when they were, like you said, the selling for the first 10 minutes of the match essentially were the Freebirds in trouble.
Freebirds' ability to sell. And if you think about it, in this match, Zenk was basically a rookie. Mm-hmm. Zumhofe predominantly wrestled against the light heavyweights and was not in there against the big boys very often. They sold. The Freebirds sold for these guys. and they made it a good match. And then the finish with the backdrop into the power bomb, which a power bomb was not a common move back then. In fact, Verne called it a pile driver on commentary because they didn't know what to call it. But just, it was something cool, and it showed like the ultimate teamwork, like they knew to get Zumhofe into Gordy's arms for the power bomb. It just showed great teamwork.
Well, you said Verne called it a pile driver. You pretty much could argue that it was a pile driver the way Buck landed. I mean, but it was a nasty power bomb, and the crowd even popping for it because it was just so wicked for that era to see something like that being used. And Buck Zumhofe going down for the count, the Freebirds making the cover there. And I did get a kick out of this because Michael Hayes was the legal man. So as Gordy hits the power bomb, Michael's stepping out of the ring. Then both of them stop and look at each other, and they begin to switch places. But Dick Worley's already making the count, so they're like, screw it. And the Freebirds get the win. Yeah. 13 minutes and 30 seconds. Not the most action-packed match you'd ever ask for. But again, I like what you're saying here, what the Freebirds did, which was we need to establish these guys as competent opponents to make this match feel competitive for television. And that's what they did. They sold, they bumped, the Freebirds did exactly what they needed to do out here to make this match entertaining.
Yeah, and this was something, I think, if you new to the business, you watch and like, man, these Freebird guys are kind of cool. They work as a team. They had a good move, like I want to see these guys again. This helped establish the Freebirds were already established, but for the new coming fans, this might have helped establish them like as a team to watch more often.
Well, the Birds go over with the triple team power bomb there as Buck Zumhofe clearly had the chance to make the tag and simply chose not to, further solidifying my opinion of Buck Zumhofe. As we continue on, Larry Nelson going to speak with the Birds. Michael Hayes says you're looking at real athletes now on ESPN, not people who ride horses and swim and play polo. I wrote, way to shit on the channel, Michael. We're real athletes, not the other shows you watch on this channel that's showing us right now. I don't know if that was I see where he was going with that, but I don't know that was the best way to get there.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. If he had said, hey, there's lots of great athletes on ESPN, but nobody can compare to the Freebirds, that would have been one thing. Like you said, he pissed all over the other shows on the network, I'm like, ESPN might not have been real happy with that.
Probably not. As Terry Gordy daring anybody to get in the ring with the Freebirds says they're the best. Pretty much that's the gist of the promo here. Honestly, a far cry from any interviews we heard from the Birds, though, in Mid-South, Georgia, Dallas. This was kind of just there. Hopefully they'll turn it up in the weeks to come.
Oh, they will. They will. The Freebirds are always excitement, and there's some good things coming.
I'll take your word on that. We've got one more match coming, feature match this week, featuring America's Champion. We talked a little bit about that title belt last time out. Sergeant Slaughter defending against Boris Zhukov, who's essentially just made his debut with the company. I did some digging. It looks like Boris came in for a one-off a few months ago, but this is essentially, pretty much his debut on TV right around this time frame. And right away, he's getting America's title shot, Russia versus USA.
Yeah, if you're Russian or Japanese back in the day, it was guaranteed heat if you were going up against Sergeant Slaughter.
And Bill Watts hated you. Let's not forget. We hate Russia. So says the cowboy. Apparently Sergeant Slaughter, not a big fan either, at least of Boris Zhukov. And for those of you wondering, what is the America's title, not the American title down in Texas or over in L.A., this is the AWA's version of the America's title, which they created earlier here in 1985. Now, supposedly, Larry Zbyszko won a tournament back in January in Mexico to become the America's champion, and he was defeated legitimately, finally, by Sergeant Slaughter here on June the 21st. So Sarge is your America's champion. And I think, Roman, it was you that brought up in the last episode that Zbyszko has the distinct pleasure of proclaiming himself as the former America's champion and former Western States Heritage champion. The only guy to do that.
Yeah, there's not many more prestigious belts than the Western States Heritage and the America's Championship. So luckily, Larry finally got his chance to reign supreme as the AWA Heavyweight Champion, because it's hard to say you have 15 glorious years of one of the biggest championship belts in your collection is the Western States Heritage Championship.
Yeah, true that. As the referee for this one, Tom Fernini, this may have been Zhukov's first taping, best I could tell, outside of that random one-off I referenced going back to April. So Boris coming out of runs with the Championship Wrestling from Florida as Boris Zhukov and the Southeastern Territory down in Alabama as Mr. Russia. So Boris heavily protected here at this point on the house shows, scoring wins over Steve-O, Baron von Raschke, and Buck Zumhofe. And Boris only losing matches on the house shows by disqualification. So this gimmick built right here for Mr. USA Sergeant Slaughter might be the sole reason Boris even got a job here at this point, I think.
Yeah, it could be. And at that time, I had no idea that these two had a history together, that he was Private Jim Nelson in Mid-Atlantic or anything. So it's just kind of fun as a fan years later, like, oh, wow, those two wrestled against each other, like when you find out that Crusher Khrushchev and Jim Neidhart were tag champs in Florida, then you see them in the WWF and like, oh, Demolition and Hart Foundation. They used to team together, Khrushchev and Neidhart.
I was a bigger fan of the Hart Foundation and Demolition days, though. That was a weird hodgepodge they had going on down there in Florida. But you got to love the talent that came through at that time. Just all the random guys that were involved in that era. And even Boris came through Florida at one point here. But he's here in the AWA now, and Sarge out here in his gear and wearing a Sergeant Slaughter T-shirt. You guys can buy yours right now. Stay tuned for the ESPN commercial next time. Cut off sleeves, nothing wrong with shilling your merch here on TV for the Sarge. Though we're not playing this up. Boris, a former member, as you said, of these Slaughter's Privates. So my son just figured that out the other day. We were talking about Boris for some reason, and I said I had mentioned he had been Jim Nelson in the Mid-Atlantic, and he's been binging WCW for years now. So he kind of looked at me like, Boris Zhukov is Jim Nelson? I said, yeah, absolutely. So people are still figuring that out, Roman.
Yeah, it's always fun when you can uncover those hidden gems like that.
Hidden gems. That's a nice way to put it. So Boris trying to jump the Sarge at the beginning of the matchup. Slaughter catching him coming, though, sending Zhukov packing out to the floor. Slaughter losing the T-shirt and begins the action, but not before Doug McLeod also thanks the people of Palm Beach Country Club for his blazer in the middle of the feature match, thanking the Palm Beachers on behalf of himself and Verne Gagne for these Studley blazers. I'm glad we got that in for the main event here. We get the rope running sequence, Zhukov and Sergeant Slaughter, and Slaughter busting out a leapfrog into a reverse monkey flip. So that was kind of fun to see Sarge. I know Sarge could move for his size, but he wasn't doing a whole lot here by 1985. So to clear Boris on the leapfrog and go to the reverse monkey flip spot, I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was. Slaughter's kind of underrated in his agility. A lot of people don't realize how quick he was. There was plenty of times where he could fly around the ring, and later on towards the ending, we'll see him fly again.
And you go back further, into his career, the more bumps Slaughter was taking. But even here in 1985, like you said, we're going to see him take yet another bump before this match is over. Pair of scoop slams by the Sarge, and again, Boris retreating to the floor as USA chants begin. Zhukov finally re-entering the ring, taken over when Sarge dives over the turnbuckle and straight into the steel post. My goodness, what a bump.
Yeah, very, very dangerous. What your timing's off just a little teeny tiny bit. You just ask Saganovich, when he ran into the steel post at the Showboat and broke a tooth. It's very dangerous if your timing's off when you hit the ring post. And
he would have that broken tooth for the remainder of his career as a nasty boy as well with Sags. But Sarge would take these bumps. We would see that quite often, that bump where he would kind of hit the buckle and I don't know how he would do it, like a double jump and go flying over the top rope. But here he actually just smashes into the top steel post. We've seen guys with their shoulder. They do the charge, somebody moves, they run into the shoulder post. Sarge is doing this over the top buckle into the steel. And he does it again, Boris whipping him across the ring, launching himself against Slaughter, straight up and over the buckle into the steel post, hanging there. So it's a very dangerous spot, like you said, Roman. But Slaughter, a pro, and he's getting it done here. Finally has enough, though. Begins throwing haymakers. And the Russian man taking a backdrop, seeing Boris begging off in the ring. Slaughter staying on top, though. Big Slaughter cannon clothesline. Sarge setting up for yet another one as he comes rushing in on Zhukov. See what I did there, guys? He rushed.
Nice.
Yeah, thank you.
Nice. I got that. Very nice.
Took me a week to come up with that, Roman. So Sergeant Slaughter rushing in. Zhukov out of the way, and Slaughter looking for that big lariat. Boris ducks, and Slaughter goes flying over the top rope. Typical move from Slaughter, but a great bump out to the floor. Nasty spill. Great bump again from the Sarge.
Yeah. he was not afraid to take bumps, and that's something you got to admire. Because one wrong bump, obviously, I mean, that could mean your career. Or, back then, even if you're out a month, you're not working, you didn't get paid. So, it was definitely risky, but it is the debut show, so maybe that had something to do with trying to put on a really high competitive match.
And nothing out there but casino carpet to break Sarge's fall. He goes flying over the top rope with that clothesline miss. Boris following him outside to capitalize, but Slaughter still has some fight left in him. The two men trading blows. Boris tries to beat the count back inside, the referee reaching 9, but Sarge yanking Boris back to the floor. The fight continues on, and the referee reaching the 10 count. The end result here, a double count out. Match goes 6 minutes and 25 seconds, but we are not done yet. The brawl continues on post-match. These guys don't care about the win anymore. They take the fight back in the ring. Referee Tom Fornini getting tossed for a loop by Sergeant Slaughter, the good guy. Slaughter wants blood, and he is relentless on Zhukov, but Boris, surprisingly the heel, he wants it slaughtered just as bad. And here comes the locker room, or at least the job guys, plus Brad Reagan's. We hear USA chants ring out once again as all the talent out here trying to separate these two going into a commercial break. Very hot and heavy finish here to this Boris Zhukov Sergeant Slaughter matchup.
You wonder where all the talent was. Did they go home or head to the next show? Like, when you see the run-in, I had even commented on this to you a while back, Ray, like the masked blue jobber, I literally laughed out loud because he looked like he would be on a TV show as the Masked Marvel or something generic. And then we found out who it was, and you want to tell everybody who the masked jobber was?
Well, we should. He's going to be on the TV program next week, Roman. So we'll just save it. We'll save it. We'll leave it with the teaser.
Ooh, cliffhanger.
Yeah, he's going to be competing on the next episode. So we'll save it. We'll everybody will figure it out by then because they're going to go to social media now. But that's okay. That's okay. We'll save it for those who are going to wait with bated breath and suspense. Who is the Blue Max? We're going to find out in the next episode. So I'm not big into Boris Zhukov. So I love what they're doing here booking-wise. I didn't expect to finish because you're just starting this program. So it would be silly to put somebody over here. Pinfall, I mean. You don't want to give Boris the belt right away, but you don't want to put Sarge over and basically kill Boris dead as soon as he arrives in the territory.
Right.
But at the same time, Boris just doesn't do it for me. So I'm not knocking the booking. And even the pull apart was really cool, the way they tried to do that, like the heat between these two.
Yeah, the thing is, if you're just new to ESPN, you're like, okay, who is this Russian guy and why is he getting a title shot? If as far as the ESPN viewers, they probably should have showed Boris beating a couple big names beforehand. And then, like, hey, I came here to America. I want to, take the belt back to the Kremlin, or all the Russian propaganda that we would hear the Russian wrestlers do. I mean, we knew who he was, but the average fan probably didn't. So it's like, and just kind of weird that he would immediately get a title shot. Like you said, you can't kill him. You can't have Slaughter destroy him in 3 minutes because then who else is he going to wrestle? It was America's title. He had to defend the honor of America against somebody. So, they went with Boris.
Right. I mean, that's who the next man up, the next Russian up here. That was who was available. They bring in Boris Zhukov, and I guess they figure USA, Russia, we don't really need a big angle to get this thing going. We can just kind of throw him in the ring. But at the same time, like you said, not really established here is Boris Zhukov in front of the AWA fans that are AWA fans that know what the AWA is. That he's not really established here in this particular territory yet. And so it's kind of peculiar. It's a good way to get going. I do like the fact that he didn't play the chicken shit heel. He wasn't the coward. He didn't run away. He wanted it Sarge as bad as Sarge wanted him to fight at the pull apart at the end. I like that. That makes you want to see the rematch, even though I'm, again, not on board with Boris. I do like the big fight feel that they tried to give us here and a competitive match to close the show as well. Now, obviously, other territories may give you a bigger match based on the talent they have. And they did give us, clips of the Irwins and the Road Warriors earlier. So I'm not really complaining. We had some fun matches here this week overall. But I'm not against the booking of the match. I wish it had been with somebody else.
Yeah, I am in total agreement with you. I like the fact that they had Boris fighting after the disqualification, after the bell rang. it makes you think like, wow, these two really do hate each other. Like they're still going at it. Like you said, if Boris had ran back to the locker room with his tail between his legs, like, well, okay, that's not really establishing a hatred there. Because if you hate somebody, you want to go after them, and he didn't care that the match was over. They kept going at it. So I did like that part of it. And I thought the show in itself got better as it went along, with the Road Warriors match, the Freebirds. It definitely got better as it went, but for the first match or the right when you come on the air, I thought they should have had a hot match. You think about Nitro, they had Pillman and Liger, and
right.
Garvin versus Larry Winters, like, is that how you want to draw people in?
Yeah. I mean, obviously Garvin's a great talent, but again, like you said, I think this is, again, going old school. Verne is he's building his TV like you would build essentially a house show back in the day. You would start with your preliminary and work your way to the main. And that's essentially what they did here, outside of plugging in a match from the arena from St. Paul with the Road Warriors. Outside of that and the talk show, it was just like a slow build to where we got here with the main event of Sergeant Slaughter and Boris Zhukov. And we hear from Sarge afterwards. Larry Nelson going to interview Sergeant Slaughter about the matchup and the issues with Boris here. As Nelson has been doing this a long time, says he's never seen such a wild melee. Okay, let's not get ridiculous here, Larry, but he's trying to put it over, so I'll give him credit there. Sergeant Slaughter demands a rematch with Boris Zhukov, tells Boris to sign the contract anytime, any place. That geek, that puke, that commie, that slime.
Yeah, I was hoping a maggot would have popped in there somewhere, but
he was missing.
But yeah, what they did show of Slaughter and Zhukov to me would make you want to see more. They would want you to see a rematch. So I thought they did a good job in that regard.
Well, Slaughter says that Boris thinks that Russia is number one, but USA is actually number one, Boris. In fact, there was a fellow who thought Iran was number one. I can't believe he did this. But we all know what happened to him, says Sergeant Slaughter. They're referencing his feud with the Iron Sheik back in 1984 there in the WWF. Slaughter imposing perhaps a boot camp style match in the rematch with Boris Zhukov, perhaps at a house show near you. So we're getting over the fact that this feud is going to continue. Obviously, there's a feud here now. We've started the story with a match. It wasn't enough to hold these guys in the ring. Maybe we're going to get some gimmick matches out of these two before it's all said and done. But you got to love referencing the Iron Sheik. You're taking a jab at the WWF, especially while you're up in the Northeast.
I was just going to say, I'm wondering how much of that had to do with the fact that it was in the Northeast, because people obviously remember that feud. I mean, it's historic. I mean, even to this day, when you think of feuds, like people that you believed hated each other, you think of Bruno and Zbyszko, Slaughter Sheik, Tommy Rich, Buzz Sawyer. Some of those feuds just stand out above others. So I'm sure he was hoping he'd get the cheap pop when he mentioned that on the mic, about his battle with the Iron Sheik.
I think that's exactly what it was, too, was trying to get that pop from the local fans just to get a big pop, for the TV audience. Because I think there was probably a lot of people at home scratching their head, not even understanding who he's referencing, if they don't have the WWF or didn't have the WWF in their market in 1984. Sarge still, he admits that, he wants more of Boris. USA is number one. He plans to prove that against the Russian, the commie, the puke, the slime, the maggot. There you go, Roman. We'll have to wait and see what happens between those two. As we close out the show, Verne Gagne is back with Larry Nelson here. As we learn that next week, the Matt Classic, we're going to see Verne Gagne in action in his retirement match against Nick Bockwinkel going back to May of 1981. Also in this corner, Larry Zbyszko going to interview the AWA Tag Team Champions, the Road Warriors. And that's pretty much the hard sell for next week. Highlights of a 4-year-old match featuring a retired promoter/announcer and the Road Warriors being interviewed, which Verne also buries here by saying, I don't even think those guys talk. All they do is grunt. So not doing a lot to make you want to tune in next week. No, and spoiler alert, Martel versus Gordy. Why would you not mention that? Exactly. Why would you not mention that? Martel, the world champion, watch the best in the world next week on our show. No. World title on the line. Exactly. Right here next week. But instead, we're going to watch a match from the promoter from 5 years ago. You're going to get to see me. That's the drawing point. we're going to see Verne Gagne in the ring. And another spoiler, that is not a pretty match. I didn't enjoy it. I sat through it, and Verne was good in his day. I'm not trying to knock Verne. I've seen Verne's black and white stuff. I've seen Verne's 70s stuff in Japan. Verne was good then. But that match with Bockwinkel, the retirement match, not so tasty to my Uber Eats fans out there is what I would recall that. And but the Road Warriors doing an interview, not a match, an interview with the Road Warriors. And as you pointed out, Roman, we still have a monster main event next week. And hopefully, we're smart enough to promote it here. So hopefully that'll bring back our listeners as the AWA World title is on the line. Rick Martel battling Terry Gordy of the Freebirds. What a match.
Yeah, that was good then. And just even now, it's just always been a big fan of Gordy. And, like I mentioned on our last episode, the introductory episode, that, Martel was a lot better than what was been given credit for. People think of the guy with the arrogance and the model and all that, but he was a very credible world champion. So to see Martel versus Gordy, it was definitely a good thing.
Yeah, a Road Warriors interview, a 5-year-old match. Those are certainly some choices to sell week number 2, but we ask you guys to stay tuned. It's going to be a ball of fun. I've already done the notes for it. I'm waiting for the episode. Me and Roman will be covering it very soon as we continue on here with the AWA on ESPN. The episode that a lot of people thought was the debut edition is what we're going to be covering next time around September 3rd of 1985. And we are only 1 month away from Comiskey Park, September 28th, Chicago. We're talking about Super Clash, Night of the Champions. And me and Roman will also be covering that here eventually on the program.
Yeah, and that's going to be fun because, like you said, Zbyszko won the Americas title in Mexico. So at Super Clash, the Mexican Heavyweight Championship will be defended in America. Wow. When Mil Mascaras goes up against Buddy Roberts.
And it probably has just as much meaning behind that belt as the Americas title, I would have to imagine.
When you think of Mexican heavyweight champions, Buddy Roberts comes to mind. So, let's put him in that equation.
Well, Buddy does come to mind when I think of bottles of tequila. I'm just saying. So,
yeah. Well, there you go. Yeah.
Well, that's going to wrap up this week on the program. Roman, thank you so much for doing this with me. I have a blast. You get to go back and relive history. I can't wait till we get to some episodes and some shows that you may have been a part of yourself, but certainly, memories as well that, when you watched it in real time. Of course, like I said, I wasn't able to watch the AWA until, I'd say, February of 1987. So by then, I'd missed the boat. So it wasn't until, other than magazines, I didn't really get to see. I only got to read about the champions, the top 10 lists, what was going on, the results, etc. But I couldn't really put the faces to the mat until they jumped to Crockett or WWF or, later on in the AWA when I finally had it on my cable system. So it's going to be a blast to live this with you, man.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, man. It's always good talking old school wrestling with you. And today was a blast, and I'm looking forward to future episodes with you. And before I go, I wanted to say, go Knights, go. Rooting for the Golden Knights to take it home.
Well, let's hope they do, because this might not come out until all is said and done. But I know they're doing well right now, so let's see what happens here.
Yeah. Well, it'll be game 4, so hopefully we'll be up 3 games to 1. So definitely rooting for the hometown guys.
Very good. All right, guys, we'll be back soon. More regional wrestling on the way with Richard Vicek in Chicago. We've got Phil Adams just dropped with another St. Louis episode. We've got more of that coming. Of course, Georgia, talking to the 1950s right now with Rick Fields. 1982 Georgia with Jamie Ward. We're starting off the Florida 1980 project. So much good stuff going on. Memphis 85. Lots going on here on Regional Rasslin, and we're so happy to have you back, Roman.
Well, thank you, and glad you had time for me. It's hard to crack the starting lineup. You've got such an amazing platform of podcasts, and you got so much going on. It's always nice when we can get together and record again.
Well, I'm so happy for that, and hopefully we'll do it again very soon, my good man.
Yes, sounds good.
And that'll do it, guys. Wrapping up another edition of Regional Rasslin. The AWA on ESPN project has begun. Stay tuned. We'll be back soon with more of that and so much more right here, Regional Rasslin, where we talk the territories.